What's up, everybody? This is the Husband Coach Show, and I'm your host, Jason Schnitzer. Thanks for tuning in. Here's your next episode. What's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in today. And what I've got for you is something that has come up on really the last call that I did with a client. And that was how your past or even your childhood might be currently impacting your marriage or relationship. Now, maybe for some of you, you might think this is kind of a weird thing, but I'd like to bring a point of view that might change your mind, might surprise you. And what I'd like to start out with is just kind of like understanding that, it's a super common thing for us to go through difficult things, right? Especially when we're younger and our brain isn't fully formed yet. So therefore we don't have the ability to really process certain emotions and certain information in an adult-like manner. Your prefrontal cortex isn't fully formed until you're 25. And that part of your brain is really responsible to being able to properly appraise certain situations, right? Up until then, we have a very egocentric view of the world. So as kids, we just think the world revolves around us. So a natural thing to do is if something is not going right in our current world, whether that be with our parents, whether that be with things that are going on at school, our family, really anything that is around us in our environment, we can really internalize that. And what I mean by that is if parents are fighting, it's a very common thing to think oh man, did I do something wrong to make them do this? We don't have the capacity to be able to understand that those are two grown-ups with their own shit, not being able to sort out their own shit, and it has nothing to do with us. That's not a common thing for somebody to look back on their life and just be able to put those pieces together in that way. So just kind of prefacing that. So really, you don't have a fully working brain until you're 25. So really anything that you experience from the time that you're born all the way up until you're 25, and of course beyond that, in a different kind of impactful way, can have a very profound effect on how your internal wiring gets put together, right? Because when we're younger, we are learning how the world works. Our perception of the world is being molded. The working model of what our body can expect from the world is in the process of developing. And, there are a few basic things that our body expects to have. Of course, oxygen, water, glucose, and emotional attunement from caregivers. And that would be another way of saying that would be just our needs getting met. We cry for help because we're hungry, or we need a hug, or we're dealing with something that's difficult for us. Our parents and our caregivers are the ones that are supposed to be able to attune to that, hear us cry, and know what we need, because we don't know what we need. So, a lot of times kids, I have a son just turned 1, he'll yell out or cry, or sometimes he'll hit my face, right? And that isn't because he's a bad kid. It's because he's experiencing an emotion that he doesn't know what to do with. And so he's reaching out to the person that he's known to trust for help. And depending on how or how you were responded to as a kid is going to basically create neural pathways in your brain. When I feel this, I do this, and then my parents do this, and everything is better. Which would be in a healthy way, right? I experience this emotion, I cry out for help, my parents come in and they help me regulate my emotion, right? They help me calm myself down. They give me food, they give me water. But for example, if you cried out for help and your parents left you alone, you might associate your needs and crying out for your needs as not the thing to do when you need help. You could be experience sadness. You could experience anger or grief or frustration and really any emotion. And depending on how your caretaker attuned to you at that time is going to be how your pathways got developed at a younger age. And the thing about it, and this is essentially attachment science, right? With a little bit of polyvagal theory tied in there. And essentially, when that pathway is repeated, right? Because a lot of times, typically, our parents respond in a similar fashion to certain emotions. Ideally, that's a consistent, regulated response where they can attune to you and not take on your emotions, be able to help you understand what's going on for you, calm you down, give you food, all the things. But unfortunately, a lot of times when a kid cries out, that triggers something in them, right? Depending on how they were raised and what's okay for them to experience. That is how they'll respond to you. And then you will inherit that belief or that understanding or that how to process a certain emotion based on how your caretaker responded to you. And guess what? That stays with you for your entire life. That's right. So there are things that you are doing now unconsciously that you inherited from your parents that you could potentially be passing on to your kids. And there are things that you inherited from your parents based on your experiences when you were younger that you can be projecting onto your partner based on how your parents responded to you when you cried out for certain things with certain emotions. When your partner experiences those similar emotions, you are going to have the capacity to respond in the capacity that you were met when you were younger. So when I talk to clients about this, well, for one, it's a huge relief, right? Because then all of a sudden they make sense. And whenever somebody makes sense why they are the way that they are, that's extremely relaxing and regulating to experience that. There's this like overwhelming calm. It's like, oh, okay, I understand me. It's like, it would be like having the control panel to like this super complex computer, which is you and your brain, and not knowing how it worked, right? And being frustrated and upset because you didn't understand what was going on and why things were happening. And it's like, well, yeah, of course, that makes perfect sense. And when you actually start to understand how you became wired the way that you are, that in and of itself is like a huge game changer, because all of a sudden you get self-control back. Like you're like, oh wow, I have agency. You're like, oh, I understand. I do this. When this happens, I do this. Oh, well, now you can start building awareness to that, noticing patterns in your life. A lot of times we start with, behaviors you want to change, because like ultimately all belief ends up into behavior. So you just start with behavior and you can walk yourself backwards to like where the belief was formed, and then you can start understanding how to change that. It's pretty freaking cool. And it's all rooted in science, and it's all rooted in understanding how you became who you are. And that, of course, is rooted in your childhood. So it's like, it makes perfect sense. It's like you plant an apple seed, you're going to get an apple 10 years later, right? So depending on what was planted in your childhood, it's like, of course, that's why you're expressing the way that you are. And it's, of course, that's why you're showing up the way that you are in your marriage. And of course, that's why when your wife experiences certain emotions that were uncomfortable for your parents, for you to experience, it's going to be uncomfortable for you to experience them in her. So what to do? Well, the first step is developing awareness with this, right? When we actually acknowledge that something is like true, it's like, wow, we can start noticing when it shows up, right? Because, you go from denial to acceptance to like, I mean, of course, there's like the grief of like, oh my God, like I didn't know this, and I'm, 38 years old, 55 years old, 70 years old. And it's like, man, if I only would have known it then. And there's that whole stuff that could potentially pop up for you. But the real juice is in really like leaning into understanding, having more compassionate curiosity for, all of your experiences. And, doing that by yourself is difficult. Having a coach help you is probably the best route to go because it's like a lot of uncharted territory. And, there's a lot of stuff that generally should and needs to be unpacked in a slow, safe way. But yeah, I would say that's like overall the main points of the steak and potatoes of this is based on how you experience certain things as a kid and how your parents showed you what was okay and what wasn't okay based on their actions, based on your cries for help, is going to be heavily based on, or that's going to heavily impact when your wife has similar concerns or similar emotions or similar experiences of different states of, let's call it dysregulation or uncomfortable feelings. Depending on how you were attuned to is a lot of times how you are going to attune to your wife. And the problem, or kind of like the general consensus for most men, is we have a society that generally thinks that men should be stoic and not show emotions and not have feelings. And when they do, a lot of times it's like, hey, don't be a baby. Hey, suck it up. Hey, don't, you're a big boy, don't cry, right? So not only have we been actively told to repress and suppress for most of us, but the other side of the coin that comes with that is like we have zero freaking practice navigating those difficult feelings. So it's like gonna be really hard for a lot of people, a lot of dudes, a lot of men, a lot of husbands, boyfriends, fiancés, to sit with their partner when they bring up something difficult. It's like a lot of times that triggers that same emotion into you, right? When somebody brings you something that's stressful, don't you like get stressed out? Or something that's like sad or frustrating, or any hard emotion for you to feel. When somebody brings something to you that has that affect, that tone, right, that emotion to it, that a lot of times will come up inside of you, which is why we as men are such good fixers, right? Because we don't like to sit with discomfort or uncomfortable feelings. We like to fix things. And what happens when we fix the thing, the emotion, or at least our perception, is that emotion can go away now. Okay, we fixed it. But a lot of times, emotions just need to be experienced. They need to be heard. They need to be seen. They need to be validated. That's why it's like, a common complaint I hear is like, man, my wife or my girlfriend or whatever, she just wants me to hear her and see her or validate her. It's like, gosh, but like, just fix the problem. And it's like, that's not the problem. Like, that's not how you work through emotions. Most of the time, people can figure their own shit out, but it's just powerful to be able to hold space and be witness to that person. So when you learn how your past has impacted you now, it makes you start to be able to understand why it's so hard for you to sit with certain feelings, certain emotions, certain experiences. And then you can start experiencing those things in a manner that like you disprove to yourself. And you prove to yourself like, oh, it's okay to like sit with this. I don't have to fix it. I can just let it be. I can learn to hang in the tension of this discomfort. And it's like, oh, wow, 90 seconds later, some nice deep breaths. That stuff has like moved through me in a way where it's like, I'm not like dysregulated. I'm not uncomfortable. And then like, of course you can grow your capacity to do that. And then next thing you know, your wife can be all emotional and she can be dealing with some big stuff. And instead of trying to fix it and saying, oh, like, what's wrong? You just sit there and like, oh, wow. Like, hey, I'm here. What do you need? You just need me to listen? Yeah, I'm here for you. I see that's really hard. And there's no need for you to fix it. Maybe the need's there. Maybe there's a feeling of wanting to fix it, but you have the new developed skill and agency to be able to just sit there, as opposed to what a lot of men do is just try and fix it. So hopefully this was like eye-opening, as it was for, my clients and my own life, for sure. This is one of the biggest changes that has like very much impacted, all my relationships, but especially my marriage. And quite honestly, this is like one of the foundational things that we do in training together. So if you're interested in learning how to do this and sorting out your past and kind of figuring out what the hell the stuff in your past, how that's impacting, your current situation, that's definitely something that we do. And we learn how to navigate all this stuff. And you can find more information on that in the show notes, jasonschnitzercoaching.com. Check me out on Instagram for more free guidance and advice, Jason Schnitzer Coaching. And as always, face the storm, guys. Catch you next week.